Andre Rison was one of the best wide receivers in the early 90s, but during the middle of his career, it seemed like Rison disappeared. However, the pass catcher, nicknamed Bad Moon, was able to revitalize his career and wound up having over 10,000 career receiving yards. For this video, I want to take a look at the interesting career of Andre Rison, somewhat from my point of view, and also furthermore, I just want to stick to Rison's NFL career and not get into the off-the-field items in which I know may be very interesting to many. So Andre Rison was selected by the Indianapolis Colts first round, 22nd overall for the 1989 NFL Draft. For that season, Rison put up really good numbers for a rookie back then, but then all of a sudden, Rison gets traded to the Atlanta Falcons. So although I started watching NFL football in the late 80s, I don't remember Rison being in Indy at all. In fact, when I was young and began card collecting, whenever I saw a rookie card with Andre Rison in a Colts uniform, it made it seem like it wasn't real, like it was an air card. That's because I vividly remember Rison's next stop. So after a season with the Colts, Rison was traded, along with All-Pro left tackle Chris Hinton, to the Atlanta Falcons as the Colts received the first overall pick in the 1990 NFL Draft, which they drafted Jeff George. More on him later on. But anyways, with their beautiful black uniforms and silver pants, and one of the most unique head coaches on the sideline, Rison became one of the best wide receivers in the game while with the Falcons. The Michigan State product was extremely quick, was able to separate, had great balance, great body control, ran all the routes, and was so difficult to cover. While with the Falcons, Rison would be catching passes in the run and shoot offense. So to simply put it, a wide receiver in this 4 wide receiver system would kind of had more freedom as opposed to other offenses. Wide receivers in the run and shoot would have to adjust their routes on the fly while reading the defense. This will be talked about more later on. But Rison's flamboyant personality and flamboyant style of play would fit wonderfully in Atlanta, especially with the brash and memorable 1991 Atlanta Falcons. So here are Rison's stats while with Atlanta. The numbers in parentheses are Rison's NFL ranks for each category. For example, in 1990, Rison was second in the NFL in receptions and touchdowns. But anyways, with that said, you can see Rison was one of the most productive wide receivers in the early 90s. Moreover, also shown are Rison's total stats from 1990 to 1993, as these are in comparison with Jerry Rice and Sterling Sharpe. Obviously, Jerry Rice is not just considered the greatest wide receiver ever, but also considered the greatest NFL player ever. And also around this time, Sterling Sharpe was a wide receiver considered to be right up there with Rice. And as you can see, Rison's numbers for 4 years right there with Rice and Sharpe. And then I'll talk about 1994 in just a moment. But lastly, I want to mention from 1990 to 1993, Rison made a Pro Bowl and was also named a first-team All-Pro or second-team All-Pro for each of those seasons, catching passes mainly from Chris Miller, Bobby Hebert, and Billy Joe Tolliver. In 1994, Rison, he still put up really good numbers, but the only receiving category Rison ranked in the top 10 was touchdown receptions. So in 1994, Jeff George, who was part of that trade that brought Bad Moon Rison to Atlanta, would be the new Falcons quarterback, interestingly, and would be the most talented passer Rison would play with up to this point. So the first 2 games of the 1994 NFL season, Rison would be getting a plentiful amount of targets and put up huge numbers that included 26 receptions, 316 yards, and 4 touchdowns through those first 2 games. And then when I went back to watching that first game against Detroit, it seemed like George was exclusively just looking for Rison in that first half of that game. But after the second game, Rison, he would still be productive, but wouldn't have the numbers he posted in those first 2 games, as Terrence Mathis would become George's favorite target. Nonetheless, Rison was absolutely tremendous during his 5 seasons in Atlanta, still in the prime of his career and perhaps on the path toward the Hall of Fame. But after a stint with the Falcons, it strangely just seemed like Rison eerily disappeared. Enter the 1995 season, and Andre Rison, he signed a 5-year, $17 million deal with the Cleveland Browns, which made him the highest paid receiver in NFL history. Cleveland was being a trendy pick to win the Super Bowl, but also with this signing, Browns owner Art Modell had to get a loan to pay for Rison's signing bonus of $5 million. What ends up happening is that the Andre Rison signing is considered one of the worst free agent signings in NFL history. Rison was being booed constantly by the Cleveland Browns faithful. He had a rough relationship with that fan base and was labeled as public enemy number 2 behind owner Art Modell. Now from my point of view, as an outsider who has never been to Cleveland, Andre Rison's time in Cleveland was quite forgettable and was also so overshadowed with the Browns moving to Baltimore, as that 95 season was strange and chaotic. I know Browns fans probably remember Rison much more greatly than I do. Now, due to that loan to sign Rison, supposedly there were fans who blamed Rison and his lack of production for the team relocating. Subsequently, Rison would be released by the Cleveland Browns turned Baltimore Ravens, and then Bad Moon, he would sign with the Jacksonville Jaguars. While with Jacksonville, Rison and quarterback Mark Brunell seemed not to be on the same page. There was once a heated moment on the sideline between the two. I remember Brunell in an interview basically saying that you couldn't trust Andre to be in the right place, to run the right route, and would do his own thing. And this made me think back to his Atlanta Falcons run and shoot days and how that system seemed perfect for Bad Moon Rison. What I want to say, as someone who watched all of the Sunday NFL highlight shows, checked all the box scores on Monday morning from all the games, I don't remember at all a highlight, remember seeing anything from Andre Rison while with the Jaguars. I can't recall anything. For me, it seems like the great Andre Rison just disappeared. But then all of a sudden, Rison appeared in a Green Bay Packers uniform wearing Sterling Sharp's old number 84, and then the next thing I know, Andre Rison scores the first points of the Super Bowl, helping the Packers become the 1996 NFL champions. So Andre Rison was someone who I enjoyed watching. He was one of the best receivers in the NFL, but then was kind of forgotten and then resurfaced, as Rison would have one more Pro Bowl season with the Kansas City Chiefs as he signed with them after the 1996 season. During his time in Kansas City, Rison, he did record another 1,000-yard season, playing for Marty Schottenheimer, playing Marty Ball, being one of the top teams in rushing attempts. Rison playing for the Chiefs was a time I do remember well, although he wasn't quite back to his Atlanta Falcons form, but Rison once again would be the number one wide receiver. Also, while with the Chiefs, Rison got the nickname Spider-Man, which really came out of nowhere for me, and supposedly the Chiefs, they made a special edition comic book for Spider-Man, Andre Rison. Rison would then play one more season after his time in Kansas City for the Oakland Raiders, where he would have the NFL record for catching a touchdown pass for 7 different teams, and that would be the career of Andre Rison. Andre Bad Moon Rison. By the way, Bad Moon is such an awesome nickname, but Andre Rison was perhaps on the path to being a Hall of Famer, but then kind of disappeared and then was able to revitalize his career. Now, I'm not a big Hall of Fame guy, although I did make a Ricky Waters video about his Hall of Fame case, but as for Andre Rison, his Hall of Fame case is quite an interesting one. I was so shocked when Terrell Davis was named a Hall of Famer after a short NFL career, really only having 3 great years, and also after with the success of other running backs in the Mike Shanahan system. But obviously, championships makes a huge difference, which I think they're taking into account way too much. But if Rison had retired after his time with Atlanta, would he be a Hall of Famer? He was up there with Jerry Rice, but it was the middle years that probably hurt Rison. But also beginning in 1995, receivers' numbers began to really explode. Herman Moore, Chris Carter, and Isaac Bruce were a huge part of that, and nowadays, receivers are passing 10,000 receiving career yards at a higher rate. So when you look at Andre Rison's numbers with Atlanta, they were elite back then. One NFL player that I can think of that had a similar career arc to Andre Rison is Kurt Warner, where both were outstanding at the beginning of their NFL careers, then had a rough period in the middle, then at the end of their careers had some success. The only difference is that Kurt Warner was a quarterback and led a second team to a Super Bowl near the end of his career and is also in the Hall of Fame. Thank you so much for your interest in this video. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Andre Rison? Do you think he should be in the Hall of Fame? Thank you so much for all the support. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you once again.